Thank you. Glad that you're here. My name is Jason Chaffetz. I served in the United States Congress for 8.5 years, most recently as the chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And while I was there, we embarked on a quest and a cause, and that is to really start to address things that were part of this emerging economy, emerging thrust in that we didn't really know a whole lot about in Congress, and that is the whole information technology sector. And it didn't take long for me to realize that most members of Congress really had no idea what was going on in the real world, and they were trying to put their toes in the water in developing policy and voting on things that they really knew nothing about as it related to technology. And very quickly you start to realize that privacy is one of those things that I cherish. It's one of the things that we assume we get in a lot of areas. And I think there's an expectation that privacy is something that you get as an American citizen. But as I got to learn what my government was doing and not doing, I started to realize that maybe those promises of privacy weren't quite so true. And as we dove a little bit deeper into it, I really felt like we needed to have a discussion, not just for Congress, but as a country, to understand what is the proper role, what is the proper balance between the big seminal question that faces us, which is how much liberty are we willing to give up in the name of security? Because we all want to be safe and secure. We know that terrorist attacks are real. We know that these things are getting bombarded on a daily basis. But how much room are we going to give law enforcement to look into our very lives to protect us? I fundamentally, at my core, don't necessarily trust the government, and I don't necessarily trust the government having all this pertinent information. So I wanted to have this robust discussion and get the full spectrum of thought. And that led me to Harvey Levin, because I thought, as a kind of a fan of TMZ and having seen the show and been to the website, tmz.com, that this Harvey Levin, who said he was an attorney at the end of the show, hey, I'm an attorney. I thought, all right, he would give me a really good perspective on one end of the spectrum about the First Amendment. Anything and everything goes, right? That was my perception. But then I got into this dialogue and this discussion, and he was so open to my coming and visiting, and that led to, I don't know how many hours we have spent talking about this very subject. And then as I left Congress, joined the IOP, I just thought Harvey would be the perfect person to come have this discussion. Hopefully you've been to tmz.com. You're aware of what it does. He founded this. He's the executive producer of the show. Has a rich background as an attorney working in various television outlets, and really has spent a career and a lifetime looking at the First Amendment, understanding the Fourth Amendment, and this collision course that often happens on the balance of privacy versus liberty versus security versus all these different elements. So that's the discussion we want to have tonight. We're thrilled and pleased that you would come from Los Angeles this morning and join us.
Here.
Welcome to the Institute of Politics.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say a couple of things, and then I'd like to open this up to you guys sooner rather than later. The way I always understood privacy from law school onward was reasonable expectation, and that's kind of that's embedded in the law. It's embedded in the way the constitutional right of privacy has been formed. It's all about whether people have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Can you record somebody without their permission? Well, sometimes you can. In this room, if everybody's talking and somebody has a tape recorder on, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy because there are 100 people around. And that's kind of the way this whole right of privacy developed. It's not in the Constitution. The word isn't there. But it was developed by the Supreme Court and then became more than just a legal discussion. It really became a moral discussion, and it became a discussion about the way we just lead our lives. And the way I see it in the last 20 years, the change has not necessarily been that privacy has eroded, but I think what has happened is what constitutes a reasonable expectation of privacy has eroded. That, I think that, like Jason said, with threats that we now face, but also with technology, which has become dangerous. I mean, technology is now dangerous and will become more and more dangerous as time goes on. I think, Elon Musk has it right and Mark Zuckerberg doesn't. We are really facing a brave new world, and I don't want to say we're in Blade Runner territory, but I don't think that's out of the question either. And I think with technology and the people who have seized onto the technology, whether it's a credit reporting agency, whether it's Facebook, whether it's a car company that wants your information, the ability of people to amass information, to organize it, to essentially create dossiers on every one of you, and that is just going to get more sophisticated as time goes on, that the expectation we have of keeping certain things private is going to be way different than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that's why I think privacy is really changing. But also I think privacy is changing because of you. That, forgetting about technology and forgetting about, security, I think we live our lives where privacy is minimized to some extent. I think the fact that you can live on Facebook to the point where your digestive system is tracked, and that every vacation, every move you make, every place you go, that people choose to put that out there. I think our expectation of this is mine, not yours, has evaporated, and with real consequence. I mean, it's funny because we're doing stories right now in TMZ this year where a lot of celebrities are being hit right now. Jason Derulo was just hit over the weekend. And what happens is, he puts out his schedule, he shows himself in concert in Milwaukee, and somebody looks at his Instagram and says, wow, he's not in LA. And they broke into his house and stole $300,000 in cash and jewelry. And it is happening to a lot of people right now. So I think people are making themselves targets, taking privacy, the expectation of privacy away from them. And, I think it's a combination of those three things, and what looms is, artificial intelligence that I think could change everything. I think artificial intelligence is going to turn everything on its head in the next 20 years, and not necessarily for the better.
So can we put that genie back in the bottle? I mean, what if somebody changes their mind, and what if they wanted actual privacy? I think of our own daughter, 16 years old, and everything she does is online. And what's her world going to look like when she's 30 years old?
Well, you could say that it's a bad thing that you have less privacy. I'll make the argument that to some extent it's a good thing. That I think that the shaming that people get for various things they do in their lives, whether they're gay but aren't out yet, and people kind of hold it over their head, whether there's a conversation they had online, whether it's a tape that they made when they were drunk, whether it's something personal that somebody finds and puts it out there. It's always been this kind of ominous thing where you feel like it's the end of your world. And I've seen this so much on TMZ, where somebody gets in a bad situation, people take a snapshot of it and they say, that will forever be who they're remembered as. And it's just not true. That what happens as time goes on, and then all of a sudden things settle in, and the things that you thought would define somebody just don't. And and I think the reason they don't is because we see so much of it now. That the good thing that's happened is, okay, and I don't want to kind of diminish the point here, but I think I'll just use it as an example. Okay, another sex tape. It's almost like now celebrities need to sell them because they're so ordinary, and it used to be so shameful, and it used to be, oh my God, it's career ending. And now it's like, oh, another sex tape. I think people have kind of relaxed about a lot of things because so much is out there. And I think it allows you to live without that kind of fear that you used to have, because so much gets out that, okay, you're just another example of 1,000 things that happened this week, as opposed to this is the end of your life. And I do think that that's, in many ways, a good thing. And I think that's one of the ways that I've seen in my job. I've seen things change. Privacy is diminished, but I think people are freer to be who they are, and the consequences of a misstep are not as profound as they used to be even 10 years ago.
So does that mean that, at TMZ, you're making decisions every 10 minutes about what to publish, not publish? Does that mean that, hey, if they capture it on, digitally, that you're going to publish it?
No.
Are there bounds that which you say, come on, we're not going to do that?
No, I mean, there are all sorts of rules that I have. Look, I have rules partly as a businessman, which I am. I mean, fundamentally, I'm a businessman and a salesman. I mean, that's kind of the way I see myself. But also, there are things that it's just not worth it to me, and they're wrong to do, and I see a lot of people doing it in the media, and we're just not going to do it. I mean, I will not put, I will not, expose somebody for going to rehab, which I think is just a heinous thing. The only time we'll do that is if it looks like a story's getting out, and we'll call the person of a celebrity who's in rehab and say, look, we're not going to do it unless you want us to blunt a story that's coming out. But I won't do something like that when somebody seeks help. We just will not do that. We are not bedroom police. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be, we don't out people. I'm not going to do things like that. But also, I don't know, I'll give you an example. Guys, you guys are too young to remember this. God, that bothers me. Michael Phelps, it was Michael Phelps. And this was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Michael Phelps was at a party. I'm almost positive this was Michael Phelps. He was at a party and he was smoking a bong. And somebody sent us a picture of it. And I remember looking at this and I thought, this guy was set up. And it kind of made me sick. And I realized, because you look around and you see two people there who are kind of helping him with this. And they were too helpful. And it really felt to me like they were setting him up for this picture. And I remember what I did was I made a copy of the picture and I put it up in our office. And I made people look at it every day. And I said, somebody is going to publish this picture. Somebody is going to publish this picture. We're not. And I want you to look at this every day and know why we're not going to publish this picture. And I was shocked. It took 2 months before somebody found it and did it. And they did it. And they also got a lot of traffic off of it. And I'm not trying to sit here and act all sanctimonious, but there are lines you just don't cross. And especially if you're in business, in any business in the media where, you rely on people who trust you and will come back to you. And ultimately, that's how you have longevity in the media business. If you break trust and if you cross the line, you'll get a short-term benefit and you'll kill yourself in the end. And I just believe that. So I made my staff look at that, but we have these rules all the time. And I'll give you one other quick example. There was a court case. Britney Spears has a conservatorship. I mean, I think, pretty much everybody, she's had it for almost 10 years. And the conservatorship basically runs her life. And there was a document that got filed involving her kids when they were small kids. This was 6-7 years ago. And the document was filed, and the person I have down at the courts called me up and said, we got this document. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense. That should have been sealed because it was a very sensitive document about the kids. And it would have been really hurtful to them if it came out because they'd see that online. And I thought, this just can't be right. And so I called her lawyer and I said, am I missing something here? And she flipped out and said, this should have been sealed. The clerk made a mistake. She flipped out, called the clerk. They made a mistake. They sealed the document. Nobody else could get the document. But we had the document. We had it. And we had it legitimately because it was public when we got it. So we could have published the document, and we didn't. And again, I'm not sitting here trying to be sanctimonious, but there are things that are just wrong, and you just don't do them, even if you can get a lot of traffic. And we would have gotten a lot of traffic off of that. And it happens every day. And then you say, okay, what about the close calls? Sometimes on the close calls, we publish things, and sometimes we don't. And we have arguments in our office. I think you've seen them.
Yes.
We've had arguments in the office. We have them all day long, and I want arguments. I want people to be loud and heard in that office because I think these discussions are vital, and we do it all the time. And I think that's the way best idea wins, and that's the way we conduct our business. So sometimes on the close calls we end up publishing them, but we do it it's conscious. It's conscious.
It really is fascinating to see that operation work because, again, my perception was that it was, hey, everything goes, but it is good to see we got good people like yourself who are really thinking through both the human element of it, but also the legal element. But I want to talk to you because we've had hours of discussions about law enforcement. I love our first responders. I love our law enforcement, the men and women who serve and do the most difficult of jobs. I can't thank them enough. But we also live in a country, especially where you're a suspicionless American, you have, I think, a reasonable expectation of privacy, and that our job, particularly in Congress, but as the American people, is not necessarily to let law enforcement do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. And there are some bits of technology and things that our government is doing that I have some deep concerns about. Facial recognition, drone technology, other types of things that are maybe appropriate for responding to an accident or a forest fire, but I don't know that we should be doing them all the time to everyone, all in the name of security. And maybe you could share some thoughts and perspective of that because you've seen this and watched this up close and personal for so long.
Yeah, I mean, look, funny enough, I think that there is still traditional technology that's more troublesome to me than drone technology, things like that, because fact is, you're going to get pizzas on a drone someday soon. And if these drones are flying around and things are seen in plain view, that's kind of always been the law, that if something is in plain view, it's fair game. And, eyewitnesses, in public are always helpful to law enforcement, and nobody's ever said they shouldn't help police. And I think a drone flying around or a camera attached to a private citizen's bumper, I'm not so sure I have I don't have the same problem you have with that. Problems I have, it's funny when, again, you're too young, but the first really big story we broke involved Mel Gibson when he was drunk and went nuts on Pacific Coast Highway and went on this anti-Semitic rant against a police officer. And I ended up getting the 4 pages that this police officer wrote outlining what Mel Gibson had done. And it was significant because the head of the sheriff's department and others, near his rank, ordered this guy to take that out so that it wasn't in the police report, and ordered him to rewrite the police report so that and all of that stuff was out. Mel Gibson had a close relationship with the sheriff's department and with the sheriff. And, I can't say for sure that that was at the bottom of it, but I wondered and still wonder and have opinions about that. And when I called the sheriff's department and said I had heard that Mel Gibson had said this the day he got arrested, because we broke the arrest story, and I said he had talked about the Jews were responsible for all the wars in the world and just then went nuts about Jews. The sheriff's department told me that he never said it, that it was a lie, that I would ruin my career and ruin TMZ if I published it. And they told me this more than a dozen times during the course of the day. And then I eventually got the 4 pages to show they were liars. And I had line and verse what Mel Gibson had said, and more significantly, I had the 4 pages that the Sheriff's Department had ordered out. Sheriff's Department went on a rampage, thinking that the officer was the one who gave me those 4 pages. They were furious, angry at the officer, angry at me, because they were liars. And what ended up happening was, I mean, they executed search warrants on the officer's home because they believed he was the source. And they got into his computer, they did all sorts of things. What I didn't know until 5 years later was they had gone to Verizon and they had gotten my phone records to see if there was any incoming or outgoing calls from me to this officer. They got my personal cell phone record, they got my home phone my home phone records, and they got my work home records, my work phone records. And I didn't know they got it. And nobody informed me from Verizon, nobody informed me from the Sheriff's Department, nobody told me there was a search warrant where my phone records were looked at, and God knows, I may have made other calls, and they're saying, no, this is all we were looking at. Baloney. Baloney. And that concerns me. And by the way, what they did is legal. It is legal for them to do that. So, the notion that, the press, there's a First Amendment right that the press has to conduct its business and maintain sources is hollow when they can do things like that. That's the stuff that really concerns me. I think there are traditional intrusions that bother me more than technology that allows you to see what goes on in public. So I think we disagree on that.
Well, part of I had this similar experience. I was conducting a hearing. It was on the Secret Service. The director of the Secret Service was before our committee. Both Elijah Cummings, the Democrat ranking member, and myself were jointly in favor of having this hearing. It got pretty testy pretty quick. 18 minutes into that hearing, later we would find out that essentially number 3 person at the Secret Service sent out an email to staff saying it's time to embarrass Jason Chaffetz for nothing more than the fact that I was a member of Congress, chairman of the committee, holding the Secret Service accountable. The Inspector General found that there were 40 Secret Service agents who started diving into my background. And that's it is a little bit intimidating. I think it was meant to be intimidating. From there, they generated an article that they got published to try to embarrass me about my background. I wasn't embarrassed by what they published, but they thought it would be embarrassing. And so it does happen, and it is wrong. And I hope we are all vigilant in watching that. But where do you actually, going back to the drones, because in the Barbara Streisand case in California, where do you have some privacy?
Well, the Barbara Streisand case is interesting because that's where a helicopter was flying over, and it was pretty clearly to me a paparazzi who was in the air, who was taking pictures, and clearly taking pictures down at Barbara Streisand's house. And they were arguing that they were doing a topography.
Right.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
The ocean front of Santa Barbara or wherever it was,
It was stupid. But it ended up going to the state Supreme Court, and what the court said essentially is that Barbara Streisand didn't have her rights violated because they shot her backyard. Now, if they shot inside the windows, they said that would probably cross the line. But they didn't shoot inside the windows, and it was more, just generally going along the coastline, and there's Barbara Streisand's house. I don't think that's the best ruling, I mean, and then on the other hand, it's funny. I, until recently, lived in the Hollywood Hills, and in the Hollywood Hills, you have, houses this high up and then houses this high up. Well, the houses this high up can look down and see people sunbathing in their backyard below. And so the question is, does the person below have any kind of privacy right? Could the person above take a picture because it's in plain view? I mean, when you move into the neighborhood, there are people above who are looking.
Isn't there a Jennifer Aniston? There was a Jennifer Aniston case.
The Jennifer Aniston case is different because the Jennifer Aniston case is that you can't use a telephoto lens because then it's artificially allowing you to see more than you would otherwise see. And the person who has the privacy right could say, look, if I'm laying here, I don't think that the guy a mile away is taking a picture of me. So the Jennifer Aniston case had to do with a telephoto lens. I'm saying that if, I'm not going to say who, there's a very beautiful actress who happens to live toward the bottom of the hill, and there are 20 houses above, and I can assure you that 17 of those homeowners have looked down in that backyard. I'm positive of that. And not, I just, that's a hunch. And then the question is, does she have a right of privacy? If she moves into this neighborhood and she's sunbathing and she's looking up and she sees these homes.
And
I don't know. I could go either way on this.
But this is one of the questions I think you all are going to have to confront is, Google Earth, you may have seen or heard about that. What happens when Google Earth is live? Do you think that there is, what are the rules of the road? Should somebody be able to look down on your private property 24/7 and see you moving? Is that right? At what point, how do we control the airspace? Who controls the airspace? What's the difference between private property versus the public, when you're walking down on the promenade or walking along the St. Charles River, where are those bounds? And if you start thinking about it, this is not some pie in the sky, hey, this technology might be doing this someday. This is stuff that's already here and available now. And yet poses a lot of these interesting questions about where are we going to put this. But I get concerned that the technology has moved far beyond, and we haven't even begun to talk about the intelligence gathering and watching your very movements. I do worry that facial recognition, when you walk into the store, they're going to already know everything about you instantaneously.
But there's something cool about it too, right?
But there's something creepy when I sent to Julie an email saying, hey, do we want to go furniture shopping? And then Facebook and everything else, every ad I see is about furniture, given my age, they're all rocking chairs. At what point and where are the bounds of what should be snoopable and what is not?
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
I'm dying to know what you guys think of this. I would love to.
Yes.
But
so we want to get to questions.
But I just want to say one other thing.
Yes.
Because this really scared me. I have one of my law professors was on the Obama's council where they were the National Security Council, and they were trying to come up with this very thing about privacy, what the government can do. And one of the things they were talking about, and I've never forgotten this because this really bugged me, was that they would have a complete dossier on every American, and it would have everything in it. Everything. Every piece of information that could be amassed on you would be. But it would be locked up, and the only way it could be looked at is if there was probable cause to believe that you were a security threat. And I remember thinking, that is the single worst idea I've ever heard, because probable cause is in the eye of the beholder, and it can become political, and we have seen abuses in government, we have seen abuses in the judiciary all the time. I have friends who are judges who will sign search warrants with a 0.20 blood alcohol level in them, and just because the police come to them, and they just sign and they sign and they sign, and the police know who to go to. They get signatures, they get search warrants, and that's the way it works. And I just thought, and that's something they seriously considered. And I remember just thinking, God, where are we going?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, questions, please, but questions end with a question mark. So, please, let's go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, thanks so much for being here. And my question was on how do you define the class of people for whom you would be willing to expose information that other people might be considered private? At what point does somebody not become an ordinary private citizen whose business you would not want to say make public, and somebody who's sort of worthy of exposing. And part of the reason I'm asking this is the extension now, so TMZ is a business and they have some accountability as a media organization, however you define that, but also where there's more ideological or political unmasking, whether it's the IRS unmasking under the Obama administration, or for instance, people working for private companies, like the guy from Google that had some opinions on, say, gender-based hiring and then was sort of sort of dragged out into the public sphere for essentially expressing a private opinion. So where do you sort of draw those lines between public and private as opposed to people in
all
the
right.
opinion?
Thank you.
It's murky. I mean, it is, and it's becoming murkier as time goes on. That, you know, there used to be something in the law called limited public figures, where people would kind of venture in for a very limited purpose and time. They'd go in, they'd be public figures, and then they'd come back out and they'd resume their private life. It's all kind of blurred now, and you know, I think part of this is because of social media. That, you know, is a private person private when they have 100,000 Instagram followers? I'm asking you. That ended with a question.
I don't use Instagram.
No, but I mean, my question is, what is a public person anymore? That, you know, that any one of you, if you can figure out, I mean, listen, one of the things I do, I created a horrible television show. I just executed it poorly, called Famous in 12, where I brought a family from some outlying area of LA to Hollywood, and I wanted to see if we can make them famous in 12 weeks. And, you know, I just did it wrong, but it would have been a really good show. But you know, I think about all the people who want to become famous, and one of the ways they do it is they do it on social media, and you can develop a real following, and then at a point, where does a person who isn't public in the sense of being on television all the time, you know, being, you know, traditionally public, but are they not public when they've got thousands and thousands of people following their every move? I don't know what public is anymore. I don't know what it is. I don't. And we cover sometimes people who are trying to become famous are as interesting, if not more so, than people who are famous. Because people who are famous are protective. People who want to become famous tend to be more out there. So they tend to be more interesting to me than people who are established. And they want that kind of attention, but technically they're still private, even though they don't want to be. And I don't know where that line is anymore. I don't.
It's interesting. Yes.
Hello, my name's Ben Bolger, and I was just curious about what you think about cities like London have cameras everywhere. And I know there's discussions in the United States as to whether police and other government representatives should wear like body cameras, and what are the pros and cons of that. I'm just wondering, you know, if you ask people, and you know, a general question, are you in favor of transparency? A lot of people say yes, but are you in favor of being on camera every step you take in public? People have mixed views. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that
Great
level
question.
of, you know.
Well, I mean, I think we disagree on this. We've had a lot of discussions about this. There are more cameras in America like that than you know, and especially with police departments. Yeah. They are there. If there's there was a rapper yesterday who got shot right in the heart of Hollywood, probably by another rapper. And the first thing everybody wanted to see was, is there video? Did anybody capture it? And everybody wanted video. And nobody would ever say, it was right in the middle of the street, oh, well, that video, it's inappropriate to shoot that because why? It's totally appropriate to shoot that video, right? Because it's in public. So if you can chronicle things that go on and thwart crime, and it's a virtue to, you know, if it's something you seek out to get, why not have bigger coverage? It doesn't bother me as much. Now, you know, look, two people are making out in a street corner, and there's a video, and maybe they're going to be captured on video. I doubt the police are going to say, oh, well, we've got something on that guy. It's possible. I mean, it may be somebody who's famous, and then all of a sudden they use it to, you know, extort something out of him, and I realize there is a downside there. But when people are out in public, it gets back to the reasonable expectation of privacy. When they're out in public, you know, on a public street, it doesn't bother me as much. It just doesn't.
I think I agree with you on that. You know, when it's in the public sphere like that, and it's clearly a public street, I do think that makes immense sense. What I worry about is the government proactively scanning you without your knowledge. There are 14 or 18 states now that have signed memorandums of understanding with the FBI so that when you go get your driver's license, you are actually populating the database for the FBI. The FBI now houses more than 1 out of every 2 people in the country in their database. And what I worry about is them proactively saying, oh, we're not just going to go look for the criminals. They're not populating the database with those that are wanted. In fact, they weren't doing that. They were populating the database with suspicionless Americans, people who haven't done anything wrong, and making that susceptible to theft and to having it hacked. And so if you are walking down the street and you aren't suspected of a crime, there's no reasonable expectation. That, I think, is not palatable, because you're going to see, and there's a case right now, take the political party away from it, okay? But the past administration is accused of unmasking this information for political purposes. And that's a very serious case. And I don't want everybody going in their political corners and just say, well, this is right and this is wrong because of the political party. I worry that the federal government is doing that. And when they're building this database in violation of the law, by the way, they were supposed to disclose this and they didn't. We have to look at that with eyes wide open and understand what they're doing and how they're doing it. And there was the Jones case. I'm not an attorney, but I played one in Congress, and 9-0, the Supreme Court ruled that the law enforcement could not follow a previous criminal. They put a GPS device on the car and followed it for 28 days, and he committed a crime. And he said, that's a violation of my Fourth Amendment right. You can't just do that. You would not reasonably have done that in the past, because you would never sic an officer to follow me for 28 days while I toggle between private property and public property. And he won 9-0. And that's where Justice Alito and others said, you can't do that, law enforcement. So I think we need to think about those things. And body cameras make sense to get to the truth of what's happening when there's something wrong. But when they're used proactively to just scan and say, and we've had cases, we had a Secret Service agent who was diving into somebody's personal background because he wanted to follow this particular woman and he wanted to learn more. And it was kind of creepy. And so that's the worry about it. Yes, sir. Again, who you are, and then question, please.
Hello. My name is Teddy Landis. I'm a sophomore here at the college. I actually have 2 questions, if that's okay.
Fire away.
So the first
that was one. No, I'm just teasing you.
So my first question, we've spoken a lot about privacy from like the government spying on us perspective, but we haven't spoken about private companies collecting data.
Yeah.
And so sort of like 2 things 2 examples that come to mind. One was revealed in New York Times article a couple years ago that Target was looking at their customer data and eventually were able to develop a algorithm which would determine if one of their customers was pregnant or not. They thought this would be a profitable thing to do, and maybe it was. And so it turned out they were able to figure out that this guy's daughter was pregnant before he figured it out.
That's the way we figured out Kylie. Just kidding.
Or another example would be like Facebook, for example, can know pretty much anything about us and then send us very targeted messages and advertisements. So what do you think the role of the government should be in determining what is fair game for data collection and what is an acceptable usage? Should there be protections on how companies do their research and how they use it, stuff like that?
I'll take a stab at that first. I want people to go into it eyes wide open. The terms of service, nobody ever reads that sort of stuff. I think we as a society have to understand where those bounds are. And when you do give Google or somebody else permission, because it makes your life more convenient, more expedient, more efficient, and you want to do that, go ahead. But I do think it's interesting what Europe is looking at, which is, help me with the phrase here, but get your life back or something like that. You can get your identity.
The right to be forgotten.
Yeah, the right to be forgotten. That's the phrase. The right to be forgotten. I just want people to understand what they're doing, because I don't think most people do it. I don't know, quite frankly, how they get away with having a 14-year-old give up their privacy rights by just clicking a little document and then putting it out there, because inevitably you're going to have somebody who's not of age making decisions and posting things that are going to be with them the rest of their lives. So the private company stuff, yeah, you all are probably more aware than most, but I think most Americans don't understand that when they do that, they've now opened up their entire life. I sponsored a bill in Congress with Senator Wyden, Democrat out of Oregon. I think it's a very important one, which is a GPS rule, which basically says, unless you give permission, you have to have a probable cause warrant to track somebody's geolocation. I've asked 2 attorneys general and 2 FBI directors, what is the definition of metadata versus the definition of content? And they would not answer. They know that. I know they know the answer to this. I asked Director Comey, and he said, that's a good question. I'll have to think about it. I said, that's why I sent you the question in advance. You were coming to this committee, and he said, yeah, you're right. I know I got the question in advance. He fessed up to it. But he doesn't want to do that because the truth of the matter is the federal government is following your geolocation, and your local law enforcement is following your geolocation. And if you follow somebody's geolocation, I would argue that is the content of their life. If I know where you are, where your phone goes, I can create a dossier on you and tell you exactly who and where you are. And the ACLU has done some great work on this to expose law enforcement and what they're doing. I'm long-winded, but let me give you one other quick example. There are devices called Stingrays. If you ever watched The Wire, remember they talked about Stingrays? It's kind of it's a brand name.
He's obsessed with
But
Stingrays.
yes.
He really is. No, he is.
The Stingray is a simulated cell phone tower. So if I brought a Stingray in here, I could gather all of your mobile phones, and I would know that you were at this event tonight. And then if I wanted to follow this particular gentleman, guess what? I could flip that thing back on and go find him 3 weeks later. And it's so specific. If he was in New York City, I could tell he was in this building, in this particular apartment, in this particular room. And the ability to gather information, that simulated cell phone tower will suck every bit of information out of your phone. There's no prohibition on private companies. What about the Sinaloa cartel? What about the mob? What about, well, let's just go back to the government who is buying these things at $400,000 to $500,000 a pop. Do you know that the IRS bought one? The IRS. And then we questioned them as a committee and said, why do you have this? And they said, well, we've never used it. I said, well, then why did you buy a second one? They did. Well, we needed one on the West Coast. All right? This is what our government is doing right here, folks. I didn't start Congress digging this out, but it goes directly to private companies as well. If you don't know that, you need to know it. And if you're going to engage in terms of service, there should be almost a bill of rights, if you will, as a consumer to say, what are you doing, what are you not doing? And then you can make an informed decision.
And then I also have a question for Mr. Levin.
Yeah.
So I've seen it reported that TMZ is one of the, quote, most quietly pro-Trump news sources. You don't seem like the expected guy to be a pro-Trump news source. You know, Los Angeles, pretty liberal city. So what led you guys to be so staunchly pro-Trump, and when did you start to regret it?
We're not pro-Trump. If anybody watches the show, they want him run out of town. And what I do on the show, and you know, I taught law school for a number of years before I got into the media. And one of the ways I run my morning meeting, which is kind of the basis for our television show, is I use the Socratic method. And I will be devil's advocate in that room. So what I don't want in the room is one voice. And there pretty much is one voice. People hate Trump in that room. So I take the other side, not so much to be pro-Trump, but to try and balance. And there's a difference between the two. I think what has happened with the media, and I think to some extent with me, it's funny because I told Jason something privately. Could you possibly call me pro-Trump?
No. that would be a gross misstatement.
Yeah, I mean, look.
Look.
Wait.
I mean, is it?
I may tell you something. I need to think about whether I should. The point.
No, go ahead. We can always edit it out.
No. The point. I need to think this through. I may tell them the story that I told you earlier. But the point I wanted to make is
I didn't want people to know that I knew this story.
The media hates him so much that what's happened, and I really believe this, and I think this is a huge mistake on the media's part. They hate him so much and it's so agenda driven now that I think if you are not on the hate train, then you're on the other side. And that's the way they view it. It's really become this intolerance is just unbelievable to me, that you need to declare how much you hate him or you're the enemy. And I think the media, that a lot of the media has viewed what's going on that way. And I think it's a mistake, because I think what's happened is, look, I think in many ways the media got Donald Trump elected. I think, and specifically the people that really went after him, like, CNN was on the warpath, but yet they, for a time, pretended they weren't. Now they don't pretend. But I think what happened is people react to that, and I've noticed that in my career, is that when somebody really pushes and pushes and pushes, I think people who consume media don't like to be told what to think. They want to listen to what others have to say, but they don't want to be told what to think. And at a point when it becomes bullying, you just gravitate the other way. And I think that's what happened here. And I think there's this huge intolerance. So when I read these stories that, that TMZ is pro-Trump, it's ridiculous. But at the same time, I will admit that I have been this devil's advocate, and I will also tell you I've known him for a long, long time. And I will further say that I don't know this man anymore. I don't know who he is. The guy I see now is not the guy I knew 8 years ago. Larry King said, who is he? And I agree with him. I don't see that. I don't know where this is coming from. Maybe he fooled us then, but I really think that he drank the Kool-Aid. And I think he is playing to that base to a point where it somehow has become who he is. But a lot of people who knew him a long time ago didn't feel that way. And I think the process of understanding that and seeing that, has been surprising and really disappointing to a lot of people. If you didn't know him, this is all you knew. You were on that train earlier. But if you did know him, it took longer to get on that train.
Thank you. Great questions. I appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I have two quick questions. My name's Christine. I'm an MBA here at Harvard and a MBA at Wharton. My first question has to do with the title of today's event. It's privacy technology, and I was thinking maybe it should be privacy versus technology versus transparency, because it seems to be a theme that you keep bringing up over and over again. And so I was thinking, what are some potential solutions? Because I feel like we've talked about a lot of issues so far. So if things were more transparent, how do we make them more transparent? And then how do we get enough of the consumer base to stand up and say we want laws to reflect the fact that we know that our privacy is being violated? And so that's sort of a question I have to you, because I think when we sign something in iTunes, we know that, we're giving away some of our privacy, but that's not enough for us to, as a consumer base, which the society is based on, to actually mobilize and say we want certain things changed. So that's a question to you. How can we get people more revved up even after they know what's going on? Because there's two levels to this. It's not only about things being transparent, but it's also getting people aware that they need to speak up about that. So that was my first question. And then maybe I should just give my second question.
Well, on the first question, I disagree somewhat with the premise that, how do you stop people from violating your privacy? I think privacy, it's a moving target right now. And what I said at the beginning, which is that I think privacy is on the wane because of technology, because of what people do themselves on social media, and because of security. But beyond that, and when you talk about the private companies and what they're doing and how they're connecting the dots, and somebody might actually be able to figure out, my God, you're pregnant because you did this, this, and this in the store or whatever. How many people in here would like to have enhanced memory from what you have today? I mean, just be honest. Would you? Okay. How many people in here, if you could get a chip planted in your brain. That would not be dangerous. That would not be dangerous. Okay, let's say, the way, it's like arthroscopically, or when you're a baby, they can literally plant a chip. And by the way, this is what they're talking about. But if you could have a chip planted in your brain as a baby that could give you significantly more memory, would you do that? A lot of people would do that because you would be at an enormous competitive disadvantage in life not to do that if others did. And that's just the way life goes. You would be at an enormous, you wouldn't be at Harvard. You wouldn't be at Harvard if your bandwidth is what it is now if everybody else could have 3 times the bandwidth. You just wouldn't be here. So that's going to happen. Elon Musk is developing this right now. He's developing a chip that will first cure brain cancer and strokes. But then the second wave of this is to enhance memory. Now, he won't say that it is to essentially make your brain a computer, but that's essentially what it really is. It is giving your brain that kind of storage so that you can call things up almost like Google in your brain, that you can call it up and you think the way you search on Google. And if you can do that in your life and remember what you did to me 18 years ago that may have been so minor, but it then becomes something that I can piece together and understand you more because all of a sudden you did this 18 years ago and then you did that 5 years ago and all of a sudden I start putting this together. You're a bad guy. And I can start making judgments and I can start accusing and I can start, leading my life and dealing with you in a way that I never could before. That's going to happen. I'm not saying it's a good thing because I'm scared to death of it, but I think it's going to happen. He's developing this. And so when you start worrying about companies and government and all that, you look at us. Look at what's going to happen to us. We are going to be different human beings in 20, 30, 40 years, where you are a Mac. You are essentially a Mac. Well, you are a Mac because you can call up what a computer can call up. But it's all the things in your life, things you learned, things you saw, people you interacted with, all of that becomes part of you. And that changes everything. So when we talk about privacy and transparency, everybody will be transparent because everybody will know everything about everything because it's all going to be available in these chips. I mean, that to me is so much more ominous and inevitable than the abuse of government, than the abuse of private companies. That's what keeps me up at night.
Which actually perfectly dovetails into my second question about artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of talk about artificial intelligence potentially taking away job opportunities and how do you train the future generation to compete. And so do you train the future generation more in the liberal arts where you're more able to think more abstractly because maybe computers will not be as fast or as smart in doing that? But now you actually were talking about how we're not going to have a chip in our head that's going to actually make us more efficient. So my question to you is, in training the future generations to compete, what are the topics that we really should be focusing on?
Well, I can give you, look, I've got a new television show called Objectified. And the idea of the show is I go to famous people from all walks of life, world leaders, businessmen, sports figures, people in entertainment, and I try to understand their life and how they became the people they are today, and I use objects that they chose to keep to get there as jumping off points. And what I've found from every single person that I've spoken with, and something that I've believed as well, is that the way to compete is not necessarily to have a blueprint and say, here's where I want to be 10 years from now. I don't think that's a smart way of engineering a career. The way everybody that I've talked to has become successful is you find a hole in a market that you're interested in. That if everybody is doing things one way, that is the opportunity to find a different way. Partly because people like different, and partly because if you can find something different and pivot, and others are so entrenched, and that's one of the things that everybody found. I found it in my business, that I found a niche that wasn't really serviced. And it's hard for people who are really established to pivot. And if they're not pivoting, and I can grow a business fast, and I'm way out in front of them by the time they learn to pivot, I've got a huge advantage. And that's one of the things I found with every single person that I've dealt with on this show, is that they look for holes in the marketplace, in the area that they're interested in. I can't tell you what that is in 10 years. It's hard for, I can't tell you what this world is going to look like in 10 years. But as you go through the world and your life, you look for opportunities. I sound like a career counselor, but I've also lived this for a long time. And if I can give you guys anything, it's this, that the way to become really successful is to look at an area you're interested in and try and figure out, is there something that nobody's doing that I can do that's going to make this popular, that's going to make this successful, that's going to make people want to consume it? It sounds pretty simple. It is the core of success. It is the core of success, way more than trying to project 10 years into the future, because you just can't do it. You can't.
Thank you very much.
We've got time for one more quick question, and again, if you can identify yourself. And sorry.
Okay, hi, my name's Luis. I'm currently a senior. Thanks for sharing your stories about your personal intrusion with privacy and all of that. Planned Parenthood got into some trouble last year for having their management expose the fact that they were selling body parts. California is a two-party consent state, so that means that public conversations made in a restaurant don't count as private conversations.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Did you say selling body parts?
Baby body parts, yeah. This is all on tape.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can look it up. It's all on tape. It's public evidence. And because of it, Senator Kamala Harris forced a raid upon the two activists. And I was wondering, where do we hold our own representatives' feet to the fire? I mean, California is a liberal state. That doesn't mean that they have the right to intrude into other people's privacy simply because they don't believe the politics. I mean, this, I think, falls under past the pro-life, pro-choice argument. As you can see, like, you were obviously disgusted by that, and I think most people are. So should we follow the same laws for people on all sides of the political spectrum?
So I am familiar with that case, and in that case, there are protections for members of Congress in certain settings. They can ask or say or pretty much do anything without any repercussion. And I would argue that's actually probably a good thing in order to investigate and do the types of oversight and whatnot. She couldn't have necessarily forced that. In that I believe she ultimately got the California Attorney General to do something and take an action. But there are supposed to be review procedures on whether or not those were overstepped and how they were overstepped. But that did get all sorts of legal entanglements. It does pose an interesting question. But you can't necessarily just go in and start rolling video and doing things. And different states deal with it in a different way. Because you're right, some states they've got to have consent on both sides, other states you don't. And I tend to err on the side of letting the states and make those types of decisions, but it is a very difficult case because it is abhorrent to some and others find it acceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last minute, I'm just curious here. I think you all would be interested. Explain how the TMZ works. I thought, I see the show in the afternoon, and you just come in, and then But these guys are up like at the crack of dawn filming these shows that you see. Maybe you can walk through that process real quick. And again, the Objectified is on the Fox networks that you can see. You've had a couple of them out so far.
Yep.
Which one's up next?
Simon Cowell, then Netanyahu, then Tyler Perry, Mark Cuban, Martha Stewart, Shaq.
Harvey was Shaq. There
Yeah,
was, yeah. I can't wait to see
That's
those
one of the things
pictures.
I've learned. They're all super tall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. Everybody thinks this is a television show. We run. I mean, we have a studio, and it's digital, it's broadcast, it's cable. So we have 5 television shows on the air right now. We have 3 websites, and it is. Had I known how hard this was going to be, I don't know. I really don't. I mean, I get up at 3 every morning, so I kind of live like a baby. I get up at 3 every morning. I have to go to bed at 8:30. So, and we work straight through the day. We never see the outside. I haven't been to lunch in 7 and 8 years. Once. Not once. We work really hard because it's, the website is a beast. I never really realized, because we started as a website, and I never really thought this through, which is insanely stupid of me. I mean, it really is insanely stupid, because the way I figured out TMZ, and it was figuring out a hole in the market, was at the time there were no online news operations. And it just seemed so simple to me that if you could create an online news operation that had the rigors of traditional news, that it was lawyered, that it was researched, that things were accurate, that when you got something right, you just get it up. And that means you don't have a publishing cycle like a magazine. You don't have a time period like a television show where you have to wait. When you get it right, boom, it goes up. Mel Gibson's story I told you about went up at like 7:32 on a Friday night. We could never have done that if we were a television show or a magazine. So it just seemed obvious to me that, wow, we could win. And it just made so much sense. What I didn't realize was the day we went live, the day we actually fired it up, and they came to me and they said, okay, push the button, and we're going to be live. And I pushed the button. The second I pushed the button, I realized there's no evening anymore, and there's no weekend. It's not like a television show where you put it to bed and then you come in the next morning, because something could happen at 8:30 at night, and you have to do it. And it could happen at 2 in the afternoon on Saturday, and then you have to do it. So there's no more definition to your week. So this is the end of your life. and I swear to God, it all hit me as I pushed that button, and I thought, how could I not have thought of this before? And my fears have pretty much been realized, because it is a beast every day, and the website much more so than the other properties. The television shows are simple. They're easy. They're the easiest thing I've ever done. The website, it's just feeding the beast. You ever see Little Shop of Horrors? The website is Seymour. Okay, thank you guys very much.
Hey, thank you. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for being involved here at the Institute of Politics. And Harvey, Levin, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh,
Appreciate
thank you,
it.
Jason.
Thank you. Thank you.